So the first question is, what are the 3 biggest mistakes made in professional boxing? In a previous Boxing Science podcast episode, I discussed the biggest mistakes made in amateur boxing. Now there is some similarities in terms of like the mistakes made and kind of the training methods that are utilized. In this question, I'm going to answer the 3 kind of trends that I see within professional boxing. The main things are not necessarily around training exercises or going on long road runs or anything like that. It's more around about training camp management. What they're doing right at the very start of training camp, during their training camp, and right at the very end, just before they fight. So let's start at the beginning, more or less like after a fight. A boxer has too long off. I think that they need a rest because obviously it's a physically demanding sport. It depends how much punishment that you take in the fight, how tough that fight's been, how tough the training camp has been, and how long you have off after a fight. Now, I do think that a boxer should have 1 or 2 weeks off before they start training again. I've seen professional boxers 3, 4, maybe even 5 weeks off, especially going into the boxing training. Probably pick up the boxing training first, likely to have 5 to 6 weeks off their strength and conditioning. When you look at professional sports, let's look at the biggest sport in the UK, which is football. Professional footballers right at the very top level don't have any weeks off. They might go on holiday, but they take their performance coach or something like that with them where they're doing some sort of workout, because the drop off in training load is that much. When they go back into training, they're more susceptible to injury. And this comes into point 2, where I'm going to be talking about spikes in training load. With a professional boxer compared to professional footballer literally doesn't have any time off. Obviously, time off from competing, but in terms of training, they're on it all the time to make sure that they're keeping them training loads just topped up to a level to try and prevent like any reduction in fitness, in strength, in speed, that reduction in training load to make sure that they're not going into training and being susceptible to injuries. Professional boxing, I'd say a week or 2 weeks off after a fight, start to build up training load very steadily, start implementing strength conditioning, the conditioning quite early on to try and build up them physical qualities, start reducing that body mass to make sure that you have the best possible training camp. So the second biggest mistake links into the first one is training load management within your training camp. What we're talking about there is not having too much time off because you're not wanting to have spikes in your training load. This is really important for the start of training camp, where I see a lot of professional boxers do too much too soon. They're thinking that I've only got 10 or 12 weeks. Some people even have less time, maybe 6 or 8 weeks to prepare for the next fight. They feel like they need to get into more intense training camp straight away. 9 times out of 10, they're often a lot heavier than when they last train. So this is going to have a bigger impact on their joints, on their muscles. The combination between increased body mass and lack of fitness and also spikes in training load are going to increase that likelihood of injury. So that's at the start of training camp, but training load management is also quite poor in the middle or towards the end of training camp, where they've probably seen spikes in training load. I've known boxers do no sparring 1 week, and then the next week they start the sparring and they're sparring 2 or 3 times a week. This is a massive spike in training load, and that can contribute to the likelihood of injury, but also can contribute to overreaching, fatigued, feeling flat, and potentially increasing the likeliness of illness. With the training load management, it's just kind of just having a plan, progressing steadily. So instead of just going from no sparring to full sparring, what are you doing in that period there to prepare for your intense sparring periods? Build it up in terms of like technique sparring, body sparring, maybe just doing 1 sparring session a week and then building it up to 2 sessions to 3 sessions week by week. So you've got a plan in the amount of rounds that you're actually completing over training camp, and then being able to taper that off effectively for fight night. That's the second biggest mistake. It's just training load management at the start of training camp, but also in the middle of training camp when you start increasing them sparring rounds. So the third biggest mistake is the weight cuts. Do a full podcast on this in terms of like the standards that need to be put in place to check an athlete's hydration level, how much they're cutting towards last weight cut, what percentages that they need to be hitting from 5 weeks out to 3 weeks out, all the way through to fight week. The main concern is that people trying to cram themselves down into a weight category that's not necessarily suited for them, and trying to be a little bit clever in terms of like acute weight loss strategies, extreme dehydration strategies as well. Really, when you look at boxing at the moment, we've got some really successful boxers such as Canelo, Lomachenko, got Gervonta Davis as well, that aren't particularly massive for the weight, being successful at lighter weight divisions, but now they're probably performing a lot better when they're going up in weight categories. They're not necessarily like big and long for the weight and cramming down into that weight category. You know, they've still got element of needing to make weight and to do a weight cut, but it's not that extreme where you're taking a lot out of a fighter just to try and get a height and size advantage. I think that it's better to get an athlete fueled and strong and in a safe position to go into fights. So yeah, definitely just not thinking, can I get an athlete to this weight category? Trying to restrict them as much as possible to try and make them as big as possible for the weight, or trying to find a weight, the necessary weight that they can perform at the best. And I think that is the way forward in professional boxing. You're seeing it a lot more. Like I said, them 3 big names in professional boxing, they're not absolutely massive for the weight, but they're performing at 2 or 3 weight divisions higher than what they were doing before. Another example is Terence Crawford as well. Terence Crawford started at lightweight, now he's up at welterweight, and this is where we're seeing his best performances. 3 biggest mistakes for professional boxers: managing time between camps and making sure that you're not having too long off, managing training load at the start, middle and end of training camp, and also making sure that you're not weight cutting drastically and finding the right weight for you to perform at, not the weight that you can achieve to be as big as possible at.